Usually I know that most people, when they hear my bio, the first question is, well, what is it that a futurist does? And that's a great question, but rather than tell you what a futurist does, I want to show you what a futurist does. And I suspect that some of you, especially the students, have already seen this video, but I'm going to show it to you all again anyways. And what I want you to do is I want you to count the number of times the people in the white shirt pass the basketball. Whoever, and it could be a bounce pass or a chest pass, and whomever gets the correct answer will get a signed copy of my latest book, Foresight 2020. So does everyone understand what I'm asking? Count the number of times people in the white shirt pass the ball. Here we go. Okay, could I see a show of hands? How many people counted 15? Some of you. What about 16? 17 or some other number. Okay. Everyone who said 16, please stand up. 16 is in fact the correct answer. Now, remain standing. Unfortunately, I don't have books for all of you, so what I'm going to do for a tiebreaker, and now only the people standing can answer this next question. But whomever I see raise their hand first with the correct answer will get the book. So of the people standing, who could identify 3 other changes in that video? 3 other changes. This young gentleman in the back. The gorilla. Okay, could I just see how many other people saw the gorilla? Okay, so about 20%. 2 others? And the curtains. All right, come on up, collect your book. That's pretty good. Now let me just show you what many of the rest of you missed, and I'll sign that for you afterwards. So here's what the rest of you missed.
Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
So I told you I was going to show you what a futurist does. And look, many of you, close to 80%, didn't even see the gorilla, but let alone the other changes. I gave all of you an incentive to focus on a very specific task. And in your day-to-day job, most of you are similarly focused like a laser on whatever your job or responsibility is. As a futurist, I have the luxury of stepping back and looking at the big picture. And the first thing I like to remind my audiences is there's this 800-pound gorilla in the form of new emerging technologies that's walked front and center into our lives. It's like that gorilla, it's beating its chest, but most of us don't see it because our attention is focused elsewhere. But beyond that, certain jobs and industries are fading away. It's kind of like the person in the black shirt just walking away. Customer behavior, student behavior is changing in some really subtle ways. It's like the curtain changing colors, but we can't pick up on these because that's not where our attention is focused. But as a futurist, what I want to do for the next 40 minutes is just help draw you back and help you see the world from my perspective of how your world is already changing. But in addition to helping you see all these changes, I want to help you think about the future a little differently. And this is the theme of a book I wrote a couple years ago called Jump the Curve. And when I was writing this book, came across a wonderful quote from Albert Einstein. And decades ago, he said to scientists and technologists, he said, if you can't explain what you're working on to a 6-year-old child, you're a fraud. So that's a great test. I wish more teachers would try to simplify their message for the rest of us. But I am blessed with a son. I'm also blessed with a daughter, but this is a picture of Sean. And he was 6 years old when the book came out, and I thought, oh, I want to see if he can understand what I mean by jump the curve because I need you to grasp this concept. And I didn't know how to do this, but then one day he came to me, he was very excited. He'd lost his first tooth. I thought, oh, I'm going to teach my son how to jump the curve. So I said to him, imagine the tooth fairy this evening comes and presents you with 2 different options for your teeth. And it is a fact, all babies have 20 teeth. Option number 1, tooth fairy is going to give you $5 per tooth. Now I'm a pretty cheap guy, so I said, look, son, this is just a hypothetical example. I'm not telling you that the tooth fairy is going to bring you $5 per tooth. But I go, that's one option. The second option is tooth fairy gives you a penny for the first tooth, 2 for the second, 4 for the third, and that penny doubles 20 times. Which one are you going to take? Well, without batting an eye, he goes, I'm taking the $5, Dad. That'd be $100 in total. I go, okay, but do you actually know what your 20th tooth under the other option would be worth? Sheepishly, he says no. I go, well, as your dad, I'm about to tell you. it would be worth $5,242.88. To which he promptly says, no way. As his dad, I say, yes way. But then I said, look, let's plot that penny out on a graph. Early on, the penny doubling doesn't really look that significant. 1 penny, 2, 4. But after just 20 doublings, that curve shoots up. So if he wanted to understand the implications of the Tooth Fairy's offer, he would have had to jump that curve to understand what the 20th tooth was going to be worth. The reason you need to know how to jump the curve is because there are now 10 forces in society that are doubling anywhere from every 4 to 24 months. It is computer processing power, it is data storage, it is bandwidth. It's the sequencing of genes, it is advances in biotechnology, nanotechnology, robotics, 3D printing, sensor technology, and the collection of data. All of these trends aren't creeping up linearly, they're shooting up exponentially. So the first thing, if you really want to start thinking about the future, is you have to jump this curve, because your future and the future of the students is going to be a decidedly different place than it is today. But rather than belabor you with numbers and statistics, I love to tell stories of people who did jump the curve. How many of you recognize who this is? He's Reed Hastings. He's the founder of Netflix. 15 years ago, he wanted to start a business. What he wanted to do was send movies through the mail. The adults in the room will remember this, but the students probably don't. 15 years ago, movies were VHS cassettes. And that business model didn't work. They were too bulky to mail. But there was one trend doubling in capacity every 6 months, and that was data storage. And Reed Hastings, in the mid-1990s, he said, look, it's not quite ready for prime time yet, but in a couple of years, we'll be able to put movies on what? On DVDs. And when we do that, I will be able to send them through the mail. He jumped the curve. But here's where it gets interesting. He jumped the curve again in 2005. He looked out to the future. He said, oh, broadband is doubling in capacity. Can't do much with it today in 2005, but around 2010 we'll be able to do what with movies? Stream them. And that's exactly what he did, and that's what Netflix did, and they became an even more successful company. These trends were obvious to other people in the industry, but they couldn't bring themselves to operate and change fast enough. And how many of you have seen something like that in your local community in the last couple of years? My point to you is there are opportunities for those who can jump the curve, but those who cannot jump the curve are going to become obsolete. The other thing I want you to now understand is from this point forward, every technology I tell you about isn't off in the future. Everything I'm about to tell you is here today. Your challenge is to understand how each one of these is going to get exponentially powerful, more powerful. And if you want to seize the opportunity of the future, you have to jump the curve and say, not just look at these technologies where they are today, understand where they're going to be in 2014, 2015, and 2020. You have to jump the curve. And let me just give you one concrete example. How many of you are familiar with this technology? It's already out in beta format, but it's going to be a commercial product next year. It's Google Glass. These are glasses that you wear, and it is as though the computer screen is right in front of you. I suspect that some of you, especially the adults, are going, there's no way I'm going to wear something like that. That's just not going to fly in Nebraska. I look like a cyborg from Star Trek. I'm not going to do it, and I don't think many other people will. Fair enough, but as a futurist, I'm here to challenge your assumptions. And I'm going to do that with a question and a photo. And the question is this. Any of you happen to know what the fastest growing group of gamers is today? What population? Demographic group. It might, yeah, I heard it over here. People over the age of 70 are the fastest growing group of gamers. And why is that? It's because Nintendo and others have now made gaming technology so lightweight, so easy to use, so affordable, that yes, in many cases, our grandparents are now playing games with one another and with their grandkids. My message to you about that Google Glass is you might not think you will ever wear it, but if it makes your life better, simpler, or more intuitive, or you can reach out to your old friends or to your grandkids in new ways, some of us might be rocking this device in the not too distant future. But let me just show you where we are today in a more business-like setting. 3 weeks ago in Columbus, Ohio, Ohio State University, a surgeon performed the world's first surgery wearing Google Glass. This is what he was able to do.
As Kenny performed surgery on the east side of Columbus, a colleague collaborated from his office across town. And on Ohio State's main campus, a group of medical students saw this historic event. from a completely different perspective.
So that's where we are today. You cannot tell me that a tool like that isn't going to transform medical education, but it's not going to stop there. Almost virtually whatever business you are in, might a tool like that allow you to start reaching out to some existing customers in a new way? Might you be able to reach out to entirely new customers through this technology? Absolutely. But let me show you what else is going to be possible.
A surgeon could potentially call up x-rays or MRI images of the patient, pathology reports, and reference material. The doctor can even talk live to colleagues or specialists via the internet anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world. That's pretty cool. As Steve said earlier today, I understand there's a quality of life here in Nebraska and a lot of people want to stay here. But suddenly with a tool like this, you could still be a professional in the healthcare industry and consult with patients on the other side of the world and be able to see their records. There are going to be new opportunities that open up to you as a result of these technologies. But again, all of us have to start jumping the curve and say, if this is where we are today, what else is going to be possible in the next couple of years? There are going to be some really cool and exciting applications. Here's another technology that's already here today. How many of you are familiar with the world of 3D printing? The printing out of physical products. This is where we were about 18 months ago. This is a flute being printed.
In a single week. The overall process took around 15 hours, creating 4 separate parts that then were assembled to a working instrument.
So that was a flute. It might interest you to know that the printer that printed that flute 3 years ago, or 18 months ago, cost $100,000. A similar printer is now available for less than $3,000. And instead of printing that in 15 hours, it can be printed out in 3 hours. You think, well, that's just a flute. Up in my home state of Minnesota, in a small rural community, there's a new 3D company, and they're printing components for combines. And this business has grown from 4 people and $1 million of revenue 2 years ago to over 30 people with $5 million of revenue. Their ability to exploit this technology to bring manufacturing back to rural communities is a real possibility. So maybe some of you students say, I still want to be in the manufacturing world, but I have to leave Nebraska to do it. That might not necessarily be true. But it's not just agricultural components. My daughter is 14 years old and she's all interested in jewelry design and other things like that. And I'm introducing her to 3D printing because how we manufacture jewelry and other things in the not too distant future could change. So there are going to be opportunities for virtually all of us as this technology gets better, faster, and more affordable. In fact, it might interest you to know, you could go down to Staples in Omaha and now buy a 3D printer for $1,300. That's still pretty expensive, but in a couple of years it'll probably be $600, and then the year after that it'll be $300, and eventually it'll become quite affordable. But here's another way I want you to think about the future. If something doubles 10 times, it's not 10 times as big, it's 1,000 times as big. That's the power of exponential growth. My son's 10th tooth was only worth $5.12. 10 doublings later, over 5,000. That's a 1,000-fold increase. And a lot of people will say to me, oh, Jack, we're not going to see 1,000-fold increase in anything. I go, you know what? Before I even talk to you about the future, let's just go back 15 years. 15 years ago, Google was 2 guys with 3 computers. Today, it's a pretty impressive organization, I think we can all admit. So as I was writing my next book, I decided to put this idea of exponential growth into Google, which didn't exist 15 years ago. The very first entry that pops up is Wikipedia, a free online encyclopedia that didn't even exist 9 years ago. And then there's this bizarre word called Zenzizenzizenzik. All you students, this is going to be on your spelling test tomorrow, so no, I'm just kidding, obviously. And I go, what the heck is that? Any of you happen to know what Zenzizenzizenzik means? I didn't, but I now do. It means 2 to the 8th power, something that doubles 8 times. That's a 250-fold increase. Now, I suspect that you're looking at that word and you're going, I will never remember it, and it has no practical bearing on me or my business or my life. And I'd beg to differ, and here's why. Cisco just came out with a report a couple of months ago that said that mobile web video communication is going to explode 250-fold in the next 3 years. What might this mean? Well, let me just give you one example from abroad and in the retail space. Tesco is a British grocery chain. and they wanted to expand internationally. Specifically, they wanted to expand in Seoul, South Korea, but they couldn't do it because land is quite expensive over there. But they said, oh, mobile web video is taking off. What that allows us to do, and what they've now done, is they've created a virtual grocery shelf on the walls of subway stations so that when commuters get off in the morning, they can literally grocery shop on their way to work, press an app, it sends their order to the warehouse on the outskirts of the city, and their order is then put together and delivered to their home or apartment by the end of the day. That's how this retailer is exploiting mobile web video communication to reach new customers, to expand into new markets. And you go, well, we don't really need that here in Nebraska. Fair enough, but let me give you another application. Today, up in my home state of Minnesota, we have one nurse now monitoring 122 veterans throughout rural Minnesota, delivering them preventative health care in a fundamentally different way. These tools are going to be able to allow you to reach out to customers not just in urban areas, but in rural areas in some fundamentally new ways. But again, this technology is only going to get better, faster, and more affordable. Because it's after lunch now, and many of you had the pasta like I did, so I have to keep you awake here. So I'm going to do that with a couple of questions. And here's my first question. Who could tell me the mathematical relationship between these numbers? 1,000, million, billion, trillion, could go to quadrillion. It's not that they all have a 1. There's some other mathematical relationship. Yes, sir? Each time is 1,000 times bigger. So remember, I said if a technology doubles 10 times, how much bigger is it? It's 1,000 times bigger. So what that means is if there's a technology today and we're only in the thousands, but it's doubling, we're going to go to the millions. If we're in the millions, we're going to go to the billions. Here's how I like to explain the difference between these numbers to my audiences. I say 1 million seconds ago was 12 days ago. I go, oh, that's interesting. I go, 1 billion seconds ago takes you back 32 years before all you students were born. 1 trillion seconds takes you back to the year 30,000 BC. 1 trillion is a really, really big number. And this is my only political commentary of the day, and this is for you students. It might interest you to know we are leaving you a $17 trillion national debt. So you better start paying attention to politics. But my point for the adults is, first, it is not okay for us to leave them a $17 trillion national debt. But my point on these numbers is each one is a qualitative and quantitative difference. And I'm going to walk you through some 1,000-fold increases that are coming our way. But before I do that, I'm just going to walk you back 6 years. 6 years ago, how many of us knew what apps were? None of us did because apps didn't exist 6 years ago. Today, there are close to 1 million apps. It's a $25 billion a year global industry, and 500,000 people are employed in this industry that did not even exist 6 years ago. That's pretty impressive. So I think we can all admit we've lived through some change. My point to you is we're going to continue to live through some change. But this is for the adults here. Here's how I want you, I came across this metaphor just this past summer. I am 49 years old, and those of you who are my age or about my age, back in the day when we were young and we'd go to a concert and we wanted to bring the artist back out for an encore, what would some of us do? Yeah. Just why I had a lighter, none of your business, but it seems as though I did. But as my kids were very young, my wife and I didn't go to any concerts for a decade. We went to one a couple of summers ago, and the big difference was kids were holding up what? Cell phones. I go, oh, that's a curious difference. And then we went to another one this past summer, and the young man next to me had downloaded a Zippo lighter app on his phone, and he flicked it, and he lit it, and he, hopefully I can light it here. And he was like, woohoo, come back out. And I looked over and I thought, well, that's just weird. But then I thought, no, that's a great metaphor for the future. We're still going to do the same things we have always done. We're still going to shop, and we are still going to consult with physicians and nurses, but how some of us do that through this device or Google Glass is going to change in some curious ways. And when we see these curious moments, we have to keep an open mind to say, oh, might that be a hint towards the future? And do I need to wake up to how my world is changing around me? And let me just show you how your world is changing. Some of you might have seen this on the national news a couple of months ago. This is where we are in the world of apps today.
Watch what he does with his cell phone.
And we'll just pop this iPhone into it like that.
He shows how simply his modified iPhone produces a cardiogram for a patient.
So you just put your fingers on that, and you go. And in a second, you know, in the first second, then it stabilizes. There it is.
The device was approved by the FDA in December and is now sold to physicians for $199.
$199. It might interest you to know that an electrocardiogram machine at a hospital today costs about $30,000. And if you or a loved one has a heart condition, on average, it costs you or your insurance company about $700 to go see that specialist. And yet here's one low-cost app that's fundamentally transforming healthcare. But of course, this is just the start. Next year, this technology is going to be $99. The year after that, $49. And there are going to be a whole host of other exciting applications. And we need bright young people to tell us what these applications of the future are going to be, because they're going to revolutionize healthcare, and they might finally start radically lowering healthcare costs in this country. Now I do want to start walking you into the future real quickly. I'm just going to give you a couple of technologies where we're going to see thousand-fold increase. The first one is the field of robotics. Any of you now know it's legal to do this in 3 states in the US, California, Florida, and Nevada. It's a big hint right up here. And if you know? Driverless, self-driven robotic cars are now legal in those 3 states. Why? Because Google has proven on over 1 million miles of California freeways and road, their robotic technology has not yet gotten in an accident. That's where we are today. I recently came across this video. This is someone getting into a self-driven car for the first time. I thought it was interesting. I think you might enjoy it.
What? Itself.
I show you that because in many ways I think that's exactly what the future is going to feel like to all of us. Just downright frightening at how fast it is coming. But my point to you is, and again, here's where I want to challenge your assumptions. Some of you might say, there's no way I'm ever going to relinquish control of the steering wheel to a robot. And you know what? You and I, middle-agers, might not. But I submit to you there are 2 groups that are going to. First, no offense to you students, many of you aren't paying attention to the road anyways as you're driving, so I would like you in a self-driven car. No, I'm sure you're all wonderful drivers. But what's the other group that might really benefit from this technology? Seniors. That's right. If any of us have parents, we know often one of the reasons why they finally have to move out of their homes or their farms is because they can no longer drive. Well, if they could still stay in their homes but benefit from a self-driven car, I don't want to say all of our parents will be comfortable getting into these, but the future might unfold in some curious ways, and we just have to be open to these possibilities. But let me just give you another example of where we are. This little robot, it's called Baxter, and it's now available for $22,000, which is pretty reasonable, but you know what it's doing? It's helping small and medium-sized manufacturers right here in the US do what? Remain competitive with low-cost labor over in Asia. A lot of us think that robotic technology is going to put us all out of work. Well, in this case, robotic technology in partnership with humans is actually bringing jobs back to the United States. And I think that's going to be a growing trend. Many of us are going to get more comfortable interacting with robotic technology in the coming decade. But we're going to see thousand-fold increase. The next technology we're going to see thousand-fold increase, only this time we're going to go from millions to billions, is sensor technology, computer chips, radio frequency identification chips. Today there are millions of these little chips on items, but in the not-too-distant future there are going to be billions. I'm from, as I said, Minneapolis, and some of you might recall 4 or 5 years ago we had the tragic bridge collapse. That bridge was rebuilt in record time, but interestingly it's now embedded with 400 different sensors that can tell us all sorts of things about the condition of that bridge. So we are, in many ways, connecting a physical bridge to the internet. And this idea of connecting physical objects to the internet is called the Internet of Things. And you're going to start hearing more and more about this phrase. And here's how I want you to think about this. Do any of you know what Fitbit is or Fuel Band? Some of you do. So it's a band, and I have one, and it has sensor technology, and what it does is it tracks my physical activity. It also tracks my sleep and some other things, but in many ways, it's connecting my physical activity to the internet so I can monitor whether I'm getting enough exercise. That's how I'm sort of being physically connected to the internet. Well, as we have billions of items connected to the internet, there are going to be some strange things happening. Let me just show you this little commercial from Cisco. Here's how they're trying to explain what might be possible in the not too distant future.
Trees will talk to networks, we'll talk to scientists about climate change. Cars will talk to road sensors, will talk to stoplights about traffic efficiency. The ambulance will talk to patient records, will talk to doctors about saving lives. It's going to be amazing and exciting, and maybe, most remarkably, not that far away.
Not that far away. Right here in Nebraska, we are already putting sensors in bales of hay. And why are we doing that? Because farmers find it extremely valuable to know exactly what the moisture level in that hay is, because at a certain level it does or does not make good feed. So they're connecting a bale of hay right here in Nebraska to the internet. But this is just the start. There are going to be some exciting opportunities that emerge from the Internet of Things. In fact, to show you how exciting it is, General Electric just came out with a report that said that this is a $30 trillion business opportunity in the coming decade. There are going to be no shortage of new business opportunities that emerge from this trend. The next trend, where we're seeing 1,000-fold increase, the whole sequencing of genes. Here's how I want you to think about this. So this fellow is a billionaire, and 6 years ago he wanted to sequence his genome. Well, he needed to be a billionaire 6 years ago because it cost $150 million. Not very practical, but gene sequencing technology getting better every 4 months, which means the price is being cut in half every 4 months. And if you do the math from 2007 and cut $150 million in half every 4 months, something remarkable happens. And it follows this trajectory downward perfectly. By the end of last year, the price had already dropped to $10,000. By the end of this year, it'll be less than $1,000. But get ready for this. By the end of the decade, it's going to be more expensive for you to flush your toilet than it is to sequence your genes. That is extraordinary. And it's going to profoundly change how we think about our health. It's going to transform the healthcare industry, and it's going to transform the pharmaceutical industry. And are there going to be some exciting business opportunities that emerge from this? Absolutely. But of course, we're not just sequencing the human genome. We are sequencing the genomes of corn, of cattle, of virtually everything else. And in fact, we've now sequenced corn not to make genetically, well, it is genetically modified, but this corn is not being used for human consumption. So I don't, regardless of where you stand on that debate, whether you like GMOs or you despise GMOs, matters not to me. What we're doing in this case is we're tweaking the genes of corn so that it makes more efficient ethanol. So any of you who are dependent on ethanol or have a connection to the ethanol industry, you might need to know about this technology because it's going to affect your industry. It already is, but it's going to do it sooner and faster and more powerfully than you might imagine. Next technology, 1,000-fold increase. I like to point this one out, especially to the adults, because a lot of us like to think because we have a laptop, cell phone, a tablet, that we've lived through the computer revolution. We're about a fraction of the way through the computer revolution. In fact, we're just 1/1000th of the way through the computer revolution. And here's how I want you to think about this. So a couple of years ago, I came across a story that said that IBM was donating a supercomputer to a university capable of 70 trillion calculations per second. I could not wrap my head around that figure, so I called up the head of the center and said, I'm writing an article. Could you help me and my readers put 70 trillion in some perspective? And being a university professor, and no offense to any of you who are university professors, he says to me, no, I can't do that for you. And he hung up on me. And under my breath, I'm cursing him. But to his credit, half hour later, he calls me back and he says, how old are you? And this is a couple of years ago, so I was 45 at the time. He said, so when you were in college, all you had was a handheld calculator. I go, yep, that's all we had. He goes, well, if you needed to do 70 trillion calculations on that device, and that's all many of us adults had 25 years ago, he goes, it would only, and he used the word only, he goes, it would only take you 60 million years to do what this machine does in 1 second. That is a little humbling. But that was a couple of years ago. IBM now has a supercomputer capable of 34 quadrillion calculations per second. Numbers like this make my head hurt and want to explode. But the reason I tell you this is one of the reasons why otherwise bright scientific, technical, and engineering people miss the future is they fail to appreciate even our tools are getting exponentially more powerful. Our ability to forecast weather is already a quantum leap ahead of where we were just a few years ago, but it's not going to slow down, and our ability to do it even better in the not too distant future because of these machines is going to be that much more impressive. But here's another way I want you to think about this. Could I just see a show of hands? How many of you now have the tragically outdated iPhone 4S? Some of you still have that device in your pocket. Okay. So it came out just 15 months ago, right? And when it came out, the latest, greatest advance on it was what? Siri, artificial intelligence. You can now ask your phone a question, and it gives you an answer. It does a pretty good job, but it still makes a few silly mistakes. What you have to appreciate, Siri and the computer processing power and the algorithms behind it are only going to get 1,000 times smarter. So what might this mean? Well, here's what it means. It means we're going to go from a world where we ask our phones questions and get answers to a world where our phones know us so well that they tell us things we need to know before we even know to ask the question. And if you don't believe that, watch this. This comes from the same guy who's developed the $199 app. Here's what he's working on next.
What could this tell me about impending trouble?
Well, we're working on a project that will take a nanosensor in the bloodstream that is smaller than a grain of sand, and it will pick up a signal when you have cells that are coming off, shed into the bloodstream, coming off from the artery lining, which is a precursor to a heart attack. And then you will get on your phone a special heart attack ringtone.
A special heart attack ringtone. Doesn't that sound insane? Hello, I'm from the future, and you're about to have a heart attack. And from today's perspective, it might. But this individual has jumped the curve. His understanding of advances in nanotechnology, computer processing power, sensor technology, tell him this vision isn't off in the far, far future. It's just a couple of years away. This is the world we are headed into. Now, let me just, I'm going to pass over a couple of these slides. Now what I want to do is I want to start challenging your thinking a little bit. And I'd like to start here. As soon as you recognize what's wrong with this card, raise your hand. Don't shout out the answer, just raise your hand. There are always some immediately. Can tell who the gamblers are. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if you... But keep looking at it, and as soon as you recognize something blatantly wrong with it, keep looking. Well, it takes most people about 45 to 60 seconds, but someone who spotted immediately, tell me what it is. What's wrong with it? It's red, that's right. It's a spade. It should be black, but it's red. But here's what's curious, is if before I put that card up, I came up to you and said, would you recognize a red spade? Most people quite confidently go, oh yeah, that'd be so weird, I'd pick up on it instantly. But as you just saw, that's not what happened for 90% of us, and here's why. When our way of viewing the world has been so conditioned to see something one way, we have always seen spades as black, even after changes color. So powerful is that old paradigm, that old way of thought, that we can't even see the new change. My message to you, and the metaphor is this, your world has already changed, and it is as odd as a red spade, and you might not be seeing it yet. And let me just give you a couple of examples. This is not for the students, this is for the adults in the audience. I came across this video about a year ago, and let me just set it up by saying that this young child's 11 months old. I'm going to show you the video, and then I'm going to tell you why I found it so fascinating. So you're looking at it, and she's saying, well, clearly my finger is working. She goes, I don't know what that thing is. She is then given an iPad, and she's immediately happy. Now, when I saw this, my jaw almost hit the ground, and here's why. Here's a child who's 11 months old, who's still in diapers, but she's growing up in a world where she expects to what? Interact with information. And if it doesn't interact back with her, she's not doing business with it. She's pushing it away like that magazine. To the adults, these are your future customers, these are your future workers, these are your kids and your grandkids today. The rules have already changed, and they have fundamentally different expectations than you and I have. Here's what we can't do. We can't be like Grandpa in this particular video. I think you'll get the point.
The what not to do with an iPad file comes this German clip. Never mind watching young children with expensive toys. This is a community big enough to watch anyone who thinks wireless is still another word for radio.
Okay, so that is a lighthearted example, but let me give you some other more practical examples. How many of you are familiar with what's going on down in Kansas City right now with broadband? Good, it looks like well over half. Google has come in and they're delivering broadband to certain neighborhoods, people who sign up for it, that are 100 times more powerful than what we have in Omaha and Minneapolis and others. And is that giving them a competitive advantage? Absolutely. They are rethinking education. They are rethinking how healthcare might be delivered. They are rethinking businesses. I know that here in Nebraska you're already doing some extraordinary things with e-commerce, and I just came across this example from Valentine, Nebraska. They're selling through e-commerce their popcorn to places all over the world. And that's pretty impressive. But I'm here to tell you, the products, the services, and the other things that you would be able to do with broadband 100 times more powerful is fundamentally more powerful than that. But my message to the students is there are going to be no shortage of business opportunities if you can jump the curve and begin thinking about how you can exploit this growing power, because it's going to be here sooner rather than later. Here's another area where the world is changing. How many of you know what edX is? edX is a consortium of Harvard, MIT, and a handful of other universities. They are now putting all of their courses online for free. And that's pretty impressive. But I like this quote. He says, "This is the biggest revolution since the beginning of the printing press. Free, high-quality education." There's another open platform called Udacity. And what you might have missed about Udacity is, first, it's grown from 400,000 students taking their free courses to 4 million in just the last year. But many of these students are now getting college credit for these free courses. Some of the other things they're doing, they're partnering with Georgia Tech. They're creating a master's degree in computer science for less than $7,000. Then they also, just last week, they announced something called the Open Education Alliance. And let me just read this quote. They say that this is an industry-wide alliance of employers and educators, but it's designed to give you, the students, cutting-edge access to the latest technology. They are using these high-quality, free, open online courses to figure out how to gamefully employ you and at the same time benefit their business. The rules are changing. And I think a lot of people and students might say, well, I can't afford university at its current cost. And you might not at its current cost. But in the not too distant future, there's no reason to say you can't get a very good education at a fraction of the cost of what you're getting today. But now I want to delve a little bit deeper into this notion of unlearning. Because it's after lunch, I'm going to ask you all to stand up, and what I'm going to do here real quickly is I'm going to test your mental and your physical flexibility, okay? So hopefully everyone can see me. What I want you to do is I want you to watch me as closely as possible and do exactly as I do, okay? So put your hands up, put your hands out a little bit, clap them together, flip them over. Everyone take your right hand, put it over your left. Okay, everyone, this is your right hand. Okay, just now, if you are sufficiently flexible, interlace or interlock those fingers. Now lower your arms a little bit. If you're even more dexterous, tap those index fingers together. And now, do you all promise you are all watching closely? Because if you were all watching closely, every single one of you should be able to quickly, simply, and elegantly, without rotating your shoulders at all, move those fingers 180 degrees to the top. How many of you can elegantly do that maneuver? Even with the twist, it doesn't work. How many of you were actually able to do it? Raise your hand if you were. So a few of the students, congratulations, have a seat. I know that I don't want to give away the trick, but I know if I don't, half of the adults are going to be under the table for the next couple of minutes going, what just happened there? But there's a metaphor to this, and here's the metaphor. And so you can go back and do this with your classmates, with your kids or your coworkers this evening. You say, watch me as closely as possible and do exactly as I do. You say, put your hands up, put your hands out, clap them together, flip them over. Everyone take your right hand, put it over your left, and then here comes the trick. And everyone does that right, but even if they do it right, you go, no, your right hand. And virtually everyone follows that hand. That gives you the opportunity to flip it this way. That allows you to do that. But if you don't see it, and 99.9% of people don't see it, then they end up locked up going, what the hell just happened? But here's the metaphor, is that I'm hoping after this presentation you will say to yourself, well, that was a good presentation. That opened my mind to how fast the world is changing. I fear, however, that most of you are going to go right back to your day-to-day job and you're going to focus on what you've always focused on. What I'm trying to tell you, in order to jump the curve, you have to give yourself permission on a regular basis to step back, to read about how your world is changing. Because if you don't pick up on these subtle changes, what's going to happen? You're going to end up locked up. It's like, how did I end up out of business? I didn't see my industry going away. But if you give yourself permission to step back and see these changes, you're going to be flexible, adaptable enough to point and steer your company, your organization, and your careers in new ways. So give yourself permission to step back. But it's not just enough to become aware. We also have to let go of some of the stuff that we think we know. And this I don't think, hopefully this will not work for the students, but for the adults, what I want you to do now is I want you to answer this very simple question, and I want you to turn to your neighbor and tell your neighbor, and I do want the students to do this as well. I'm curious as to see what happens. Tell your neighbor what two colors the yield sign is. Go ahead. Tell your neighbor what two colors the yield sign is. Okay, those of you who said yellow and black, congratulations. That was the correct answer up until 1971. The yield sign has been red and white for 42 years. Students, I just want you to know that many of your teachers still think yield signs are yellow and black, and this is who you're being taught by. But no, I've just... but no, look, this is just a lighthearted example, but again, it does have a powerful metaphor. And the metaphor is this, is that many of us adults, we learned years ago that yield signs were yellow and black. The problem is that old crappy information has just stuck in our head, even in the face of overwhelming visual evidence to the contrary. We drive by red and white yield signs virtually every day. I know that some of you are going, no way, that is not true. Yes, it is. In fact, the first yield sign you see after leaving the convention will be red and white, and curiously enough, every other one all the way home will be red and white. Inevitably, I know someone will want to come up to me at the break and go, well, in my rural area in Nebraska, they're still yellow and black. No, they are not, and they have not been for years. So you cannot hang your hat that your rural community is somehow unique and still has these signs. But here's the, again, the metaphor is this. Look, especially for us adults, there are in fact things that were true years ago that we learned early in our academic career or early in our professional career. But we hold them as gospel even though the world has changed. My message to you is not everything that is in your head is necessarily true. So here's what I'd like you to do if you got this question wrong. What I'd like you to do is the next time you see a red and white yield sign, which will be the next time you see a yield sign, I just want you to think to yourself, how might my world have changed and I'm just not seeing it? Use this as a reminder that all of us have to stay humble to the idea that not everything that we think we know is necessarily true. Now, those of you who said yellow and black, I am not finished with you yet. If you're curious as to what your brain looks like, here's what your brain kind of looks like. That's what your brain kind of looks like. Now, I actually know these people. They're the parents of my son's soccer coach up in the Twin Cities, but they are from Lincoln, Nebraska. So, and did any of you see the Ellen DeGeneres DeGeneres show a couple of months ago. They were actually on it because she found this photo so hilarious. But my metaphor is this, is that many of us need to update our mental wardrobe because we hold a lot of old things. And let me just give you one example. Again, this won't work for the students, but I think it's important to remind the adults of this. I talk to a lot of people my age who go, social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, it's all just a colossal waste of time. All of these sites should just merge into one super time wasting website called UTwitface. I just don't get. Why are people tweeting what they had for lunch? And my message to you is if that's your impression of social media, you're just looking at this incredible tool from an old perspective. And by way of visual metaphor, let me take you back 25 years and let's just see how this guy reacts to this then new technology. He thinks he understands it. So I think we can all agree, look, if you don't understand a new technology, you might mistreat it. If that one didn't work for you, let's go a little further back in time and let's watch what happens here. Again, to me, this is a metaphor, and the metaphor is this. If you still think that social media is just this colossal waste of time, you're looking at this incredibly powerful new tool, and you're just dismissing it. You have to keep an open mind, and there are some extraordinary things that we can do with social media. How many of you know what Airbnb is? Some of you know. Airbnb was started by a couple of students, just 3 or 4. Do you want to come up on stage? Who has that? Come on up. Well, I feel as though I should do a dance up here until this is over. If it makes it, whoever did that, if it makes it feel any better, I was just at my daughter's student teacher conference, and apparently my hearing is going because it was my phone that was going off and it was right next to me, and I was actually looking around. It's like, who is that jerk off who is not turning off their, only to find out it was actually me. So I'm very forgiving. But again, Airbnb started just 4 years ago, and they're using cloud computing and social networking, and now, instead of going to a hotel room, you can actually find people who are renting out high-quality apartments and homes at a fraction of the price. And the number of people who are finding rooms when they travel has grown from virtually 0 to 5 million. Airbnb is now bigger than all Hilton properties in the course of just a couple of years. And these students are now virtually billionaires because they've understood how to exploit social media and cloud computing to do things that weren't even possible 4 or 5 years ago. But again, I want to help you jump the curve, and this is one of the characteristics I want to mention in addition to unlearning, and that's what the yield sign was all about, is we have to embrace this other characteristic, and I'm going to set this characteristic up this way. What I want you to do is I want you to watch this video and tell me which way you see the dancer spinning. Could I just see a show of hands? How many of you see her spinning clockwise? Could I see a show of hands? How many of you? Okay. How many of you see her spinning counterclockwise? Okay, so about half. How many of you have actually been able to see her spin both directions? This is a mind-blowing idea. She is, in fact, spinning both directions at the same time. If you can't see it, this is just going to hurt your head. In fact, it hurt my head for 5 weeks. Every day I would go back to the website. It's like, nope, I just see her spinning one way. What do you mean? But my kids came in and they saw it immediately. But finally, after 5 weeks, it clicked. We do not have 5 weeks, so I am going to spare you, those of you who can only see her spinning one way, but I'm going to help you think about this in a different way. It's often been said that if something looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. And undoubtedly, you will all see a duck there. But what else do you see? A rabbit, that's right. And if you can't see a rabbit, I cannot help you. No, I'm just kidding. If you still can't see a rabbit, instead of envisioning a duck's bill, think of those as ears, but then the creature's looking off the other way. What's interesting is you can toggle your brain back and forth. 1 second it's a duck, the next it's a rabbit. It is not the picture that is changing, it's your brain that's changing. And that exact same phenomenon is happening with the spinning dancer. Why do I tell you this? Well, a couple of years ago, a management group looked out to the future and said, what makes a successful leader in government, business, not-for-profit world? And one characteristic rose to the top. And you know what that characteristic was? It was a leader's ability to embrace ambiguity. Often we like to think the world is black or white. It's a duck or a rabbit. She's spinning this way or that way. The world's a lot more ambiguous, and the future is going to be a lot more ambiguous. Steve said earlier today we have to keep an open mind. And here's why we have to keep an open mind. Because there's going to be no shortage of opportunities to exploit in the future. But if you just lock your head into thinking there's only one way to think of my job or my career or my community, you're going to miss out on all of these other exciting applications. How many of you are familiar with what Kickstarter is? Kickstarter is, for those of you who don't know it, here's how I like to explain it to the adults. Do you remember during the last government shutdown, the Republicans tried to close the National Endowment of Arts? Well, they weren't successful, and I think that that was a good thing, but it might interest you to know that we now spend $200 million on the National Endowment of Arts. Kickstarter was just started 3 years ago, and they now raise $400 million from interested citizens to do what? To do the exact same thing that the National Endowment of Arts is doing. If someone has a good idea, instead of going to their local bank, they can now use social media, say, this is the business I want to start, and if you have a good business, you're going to get funding for it. And let me just give you one example. This is a company just 6 months ago. It's called Oculus Rift. They're creating a virtual reality headset for gamers. And so the fellow is only 20 years old, and it's so good he gave it to his 90-year-old grandma, and he said, hey, Gran, try this out.
I'm taking a video. This is going on YouTube.
Oh, man.
Cindy, what do you think?
It's so real, and it's a picture in here, huh?
Yeah.
So Granny was really blown away by that, and she might become a very avid gamer. But that's not the only application of this technology. The virtual reality is now so good. First, they've raised $2.5 million. And then once they raised the $2.5 million, real venture capitalists came in and said, wow, this is really good. They've raised another $25 million, and they're commercializing this product. But one of the things they're doing is they're giving it to financial advising companies, and they're putting the technology on people, and they're saying, here's what you will look like when you're 80 years old. And you know, once people have actually seen what they might look like 40, 50 years in the future, you know what they're more likely to do? Save for their retirement. So they are using this new gaming technology to think about how they can serve their clients in the financial service industry in a different way. There's going to be no shortage of opportunities for creative individuals to exploit the future. One of the things I want to say, how many of you are familiar with this famous optical illusion? Many of you are. You either see the profile of a young woman or you see the face of an elderly woman. And I will make a copy of this presentation available to anyone who wants it, if you can only see one. But the metaphor is this, is that many of us like to think of mentors as being only older, that we're older, we're more experienced, and we can help out you young students. And that's entirely appropriate. But that's the equivalent of just being able to sort of see the elderly face in this. In this new world, all of us, especially those of us who are over the age of 40, we have to reach out to these students and ask them to be reverse mentors. Why? Because they see the world differently, they understand these new tools and techniques differently, and they can spot and tell us when these yield signs have changed and we're just not seeing it. So if you don't have a reverse mentor, start talking to some of these students and get one. Now, let me just wrap up real quickly with my return to my responsibility as a futurist and help you think and how to jump the curve. So I'm going to give away a book to whoever gets this is my book on higher on learning. So to whoever can answer this question. What I'd like all of you to now do is I want you to picture a lake that you're familiar with, okay? And let's say it's September. Let's say it's the first day of September and there's a single lily pad on this lake. Okay? Now, if it's a bigger lake, the lily pad's going to be bigger, but the lily pad doubles every day in September. So on day 2, September 2nd, there are only 2. The next day, there would be 4. The day after that, 8, 16, 32, 64. Keeps doubling. And then on that final day, the lily pads cover the whole lake. Can everyone kind of picture that exponential growth? Okay? So here's the question, and I'll give the book to whoever gets the answer within 1 percentage point. On day 20, 2/3 of the way through this doubling exercise, what percentage of the lake is covered? Think you know? You can wager a guess, too, if you want. Yeah. Okay, anyway, I saw another young gentleman back here. Yes, sir. 70? 70? No. 5? No. 100%? 100%? No. Yes, 1%. Congratulations, you are within 1%. You're still a little high, but you're within the parameters. Do you actually know what the more precise answer is? More precise answer is 1/10 of 1%. And you're like, what the hell? You've just stood up here for quite a while telling me how fast exponential growth is growing, and you're telling me that the lily pads only cover 1/10 of 1%? Yes, in fact, that is exactly what I am telling you, because what else did I tell you? If something just doubles 10 more times, which it will, we're only on day 20, how much bigger does it get? 1,000 times. So here's what happens. By day 25, we're just a little bit over 3. It is not until day 29 we finally get over 50, but once over 50, what happens? Boom! The whole thing is covered. Why do I show you this? Well, I suspect a lot of you are saying, well, Mr. Future Man, the world's changed as fast as you say it is. How come my world here in Nebraska feels pretty much the same? My message to you is this. Every technology I've told you about has in fact been doubling. What you have to appreciate, we're just at day 20. The really big change is just ahead of us. That is the future we are all preparing for. This is why we need to jump the curve. This is the future you're all graduating into. So I know I've just dropped a bomb on you. Just want all of you, especially you adults, to take a deep breath. And I want to remind you we've lived through this. I'm going to prove it to you real quick. How many of you remember the hit movie from 1987, Wall Street? Any of you remember that movie? Some of you do. Michael Douglas played Gordon Gekko. He's this high-powered guy, Wall Street guy. Remember what device they showed him using 25 years ago in the movie? That's right. It was that brick-like cell phone. For you students, that bad boy was called the Motorola Dynatech 8000X, and it just reeked of power and prestige, and it cost $5,000. Well, let's fast forward to today. This is a real unemployment line, but what does every unemployed person have? It's not just a cell phone, it's a smartphone. You can access the internet, you can social network, you can store every song you ever purchased. If you're so motivated, you can shoot, produce, edit a movie with it. And now with Siri, you can ask it all sorts of questions. It is a demonstrably more powerful tool at a fraction of the cost. And what has happened with these devices in just the last couple of years? Like those lily pads, boom, they exploded out and they're transforming education and healthcare. There's going to be no shortage of opportunities. My message to you is all of these technologies I've told you about, they're just at the Michael Douglas cell phone stage. They're going to get better, faster, lighter, and they're going to explode out. So let me just wrap up with this. How many of you see this logo virtually every day, if not at least once a week? Could I just see a show of hands? How many of you have ever seen the shape in the logo? So about 10% of you. And what is it? It's an arrow. And there it is. It's right in front of you. And again, if you can't see it, I can't help you. No, it's not true. I can help you. It's right there between the E and the X, and it has always been there. To me, this is yet another reminder that very few of us see the world as clearly as we like to believe we do. Again, every technology I've told you about isn't off in the future. It is here today. And these trends, tools, and technologies are staring us in the face. Only that arrow isn't just going linearly, it's going exponentially. This is why we need to jump the curve. And my last point is this, is I understand that my talk leaves a lot of people feeling anxious about the future. But what's the best way to deal with that anxiety? Here it is. It's been said that the best way to predict the future is to create it yourself. These trends, these tools, these technologies are real. But the future is only going to be created in your hands. So don't fear these tools and trends. Embrace them to continue to create your own future. And if you do that, Nebraska is going to have a continued successful future. So with that, I really appreciate your attention. Do we have to